Now to James Wild, MP. Mr. Wild, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I want to focus now on the impact of the programmes. And my constituency, North West Norfolk, has 10,000 properties with an annual flood risk of at least 1%. And your target of 300,000 homes better protected has the benefit of being very clear and easy to understand. And over 2,000 homes have been protected in my constituency, which my constituents are grateful for. But how confident are you that you have a good understanding of how far the overall flood risk has been reduced as a result of the capital investment programme, Mr. Bevan? Sir James.
Pretty confident, I think, would be the answer. We do know, as you said, Mr. Wild, you did say, as you know, we do know that we're about to successfully reduce flood risk for 300,000 homes up and down the country, including in your constituency. We can measure that. We know the extent to which we have reduced risk in individual schemes. So we have what we call a measure of annual exceedance probability, which is 1 in 100 would be a good example. That would mean that there would be a 1% chance every year that the specifications of the scheme would be exceeded. So we can measure individual levels of protection. And we do have what we call our national flood risk assessment, which measures flood risk for the country as a whole, and which we are updating in 2024 to bring in a more sophisticated analysis of overall flood risk.
Because it comes through from the report, it's not clear how you take account of properties that are less well protected throughout this period, for example, whether through housing or other developments. So how do you capture that within your figures?
So for each proposed flood defence scheme that we build, we need to calculate how much government funding we are entitled to spend on it according to the government's policy. As you know, the key element of that is how many homes will be better protected. And so that will be one of the first questions we ask as we are designing a scheme: how many homes can we protect, and at what cost? And that will be clear for every one of the schemes. So we will be very clear from the outset the number of properties that we can protect by the scheme. We'll be very clear at the outset what the level of enhanced protection will be from that scheme. So in aggregate, we can be, although it's very difficult to put a single figure on the overall improvement in flood protection from the current 6-year programme. Our calculation has been that overall, and if you aim off for all the other factors like climate change, population growth, etc., then overall in the current 6-year investment programme, which we're about to complete, we're estimating that there'll be 5% less economic damage overall from flooding in an average year as a result of that programme. And we've used that same method to estimate that for the future 6-year programme, which we're about to embark on, it will be better, that there will be up to 11% less economic damage in an average year as a result of the net investments that we're making.
If I just pick up on paragraph 14 of the report on page 8, where what has happened during this period to flood risk for non-residential buildings, agricultural land and other infrastructure?
That we don't measure unless that would be part of a particular flood scheme. It's very hard, obviously, to measure overall flood risk in relation to, let's say, agricultural land. How do you define the land that you're measuring? How do you define the factors that are affecting flood risk? What we do, and this is part of the present government policy which we give effect to, is take account of the benefits of protecting agricultural land, infrastructure, the environment. We will always try to include those benefits in flood schemes that we design, and many of them do include those benefits. And the current policy does allow us to spend some government grant as part of flood schemes to protect agricultural land and other factors, but it deliberately, as you know, that policy deliberately focuses most government funding on the protection of homes.
So you don't measure it. So you can't say to the committee whether the flood risk for agricultural land has gone up, stayed the same, or reduced?
I could probably tell you, if I asked my experts, to give you an estimate of flood risk for a particular piece of agricultural land, a particular piece in your constituency, for example. We may well know that, not least because we work with farmers, on the borders of our schemes. Sometimes they're part of our schemes because we, with farmers' consent, we will sometimes use agricultural land as a flood storage reservoir when flooding happens. I can't give you a figure for agricultural land in the UK and the overall risk to that.
Okay. Turning to Ms. Finkelstein, in the DEFRA flood statement, there's an ambition to create a nation more resilient to future flood and coastal erosion risk. How will you know, and more importantly, how will we know if you've achieved that ambition?
Yeah, so the policy statement sets out, I think, 40 actions that we are seeking to take in order to achieve that ambition, and they range in things that are more or less measurable. So the intention is to do that, is to act on a wide range of areas, and I think picks up from what Sir James was saying earlier. Obviously, part of that is around delivering the new scheme, but there are a whole range of other ways in which we will, in which to make us more resilient in future.
I think the NAO report comments on the lack of smartness in the vast majority of the targets and the actions in the report. How can we judge you when so few of them are time limited and measurable?
I think we feel that it's an overarching policy statement. A number of these are strategic direction that we want to take. A number of them do have measures, so it's a combination of things. But beyond it, we will be doing things off the back of the policy statement, which will have further kind of measures associated with them.
Okay, and the Environment Strategy Agency strategy document, and your document talks about resilience and adaptation going together. I think it's probably one for Sir James. There's projects in my constituency of salt marshes along the coast and other projects, but how do you see the balance between hard and natural defences in delivering that resilience?
So I will answer the question, Mr. Wild, but just to add to what the Permanent Secretary said in response to your last question, our national strategy, which will implement the government's policy, does have, as the NEO acknowledged, a whole bunch of smart objectives, goals, timelines. We will publish an action plan in April to tell you how we will deliver those, and you are very welcome to hold us to account for them. On the strategy itself, I think the key, there's some really new stuff in that strategy. I mentioned already the shift to resilience as well as protection, and you've just picked up on it right there. There is also greater emphasis in the new flood strategy on using not just hard defences, but nature-based solutions that slow the flow of water. I think we can all agree that is a sensible thing to do. There's greater emphasis on growth. We're very clear now that part of the objective as we manage flood risk in the country needs to be ensuring that the spending on that management contributes to job creation and sustainable growth in local places. And the sort of final element that I think is worth underlining is that we're being very clear now that flood defence is everyone's job. It's not just the job of the Environment Agency or the government, though we have key roles to play in that. We do need to, if we're going to really protect the country and make ourselves more resilient in the future under the climate change that we're experiencing, we need everybody to understand their flood risk, their responsibility, and how they can take action. And that is just as an important part of the future strategy as, building hard new defences over the next 6 years.
Yeah, I sort of pick up in your strategy. You talk about the one of the schemes that runs along the coast from Snettisham and around bits of the coast in my constituency, the East Wash Coastal Community Investment Scheme. And I speak regularly to Mike McDonald, who's done a lot of work for that. That scheme essentially runs from the hard defences from Hunstanton round to Wolverton, and is a recharge and recycle scheme. What is the EA's view on the merits of harder defences versus some of the natural alternatives?
My view is that the best flood defence is the one that you can't see. That is either invisible because it's designed in such a way that it doesn't cause any damage to the environment and people's surroundings, or that is a natural flood defence. And you've mentioned a good example of where we use sand recharge or helping steer the way in which the sand spreads itself around the shoreline to reduce flood risk. So, we will use whatever is most effective to protect the maximum number of people and keep them safe. In some parts of the world, in many parts of the world, that will have to mean concrete, and in some places it means higher walls. But I think we would always rather design and deliver schemes that work for the local community, that are beautiful as well as practical, that help ensure growth as well as protecting people against flooding. And the default should be working with nature rather than against it.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in Ms. Finkelstein on this point as well, and then go back to Mr. Wild. Ms. Finkelstein.
Yes, I realise that I should have given some greater clarity to Mr. Wild, because one of the actions in the policy statement is the work that we're doing to develop a sort of national set of indicators on risk, and that will give you a better set, of indicators to hold us to account to.
Okay, just on that scheme, Sir James, the one around the Snettisham scheme. At the moment, it's the individual caravan owners who pay an annual levy to provide the bulk of the funding for that. A question that I've been asked to ask is whether parish councils have the ability to use a precept for flood defences. The Community Interest Company has been given different advice on that. I wonder if either you or DEFRA could come back with your view on whether parish councils do have that power.
So my answer is that we will always look to maximise the sources of funding for any flood defence, even if the policy would allow us to fund it fully from the government. Obviously, the more funding we can get from local sources, the better, because then the more flood defence schemes we can deliver. We do have schemes where parish councils have contributed either in cash or in kind. Local authorities obviously contribute, lots of other public sector and some private sector organisations do too. So, the more the merrier would be my approach.
Yeah, the specific question is whether they have the power to use precept. Conflicting advice has been given to the KIC previously. I don't know if you or DEFRA could come back in writing on that specific question. That would be helpful. Obviously, East Anglia's got some of the most productive agricultural land in the country. Protecting property is obviously important, and that's the main metric you go on, and we've discussed that a bit. But some people in my area and around East Anglia are concerned that there's a plan to let some of that agricultural land go. So are you doing enough to protect that valuable land as well as obviously people's homes, which are incredibly important?
Well, as I said, at the moment, the current policy focuses on protecting people's homes, but it does allow us, and we do seek to ensure that we do, take account of the abilities to protect agricultural land where we can. Some agricultural land, as I said, we already use by agreement with farmers as part of our flood defences, and farmers in those cases are usually compensated for that. But it's a debate that we need to have. Ultimately, we can spend our money however we like, but we can only spend it once. So I think, there is a legitimate debate to be had, both about how much we want to spend on protection versus resilience, and about how much in future we want to spend on homes, on the one hand, versus farmland or infrastructure or other assets.
Yeah, and I'm aware there's a lot of work going on as part of the Future Fens study, but I think that is a very important question on which obviously farmers, and we have so we want to build up our sufficiency in food, obviously retaining agricultural land as far as possible is going to be very important. Just to come back on one of your earlier points, Sir James, on economic damage and that measurement. Why is that really considered a great measurement when that means if you look at a flat in Chelsea, that will get the protection for that would be 20 houses somewhere else?
I mean, the main sort of metric we use is the benefit cost ratio of a scheme. So for each individual scheme, for every pound that we spend on that scheme, how many pounds of damage will it avoid? And you're right, Mr. Wild, that the answer to that will depend on which part of the world you're asking the question. But the overall benefit cost ratio of our flood defence scheme programme is a very good one. The current 6-year programme we're about to finalise is 8 to 1. So for every pound we spend, on average, £8 of damage are avoided. And although it'll be slightly lower in the future 6-year programme, it'll still be over 5 to 1. And those are just the economic benefits. I think the non-economic benefits of flood defences, the mental health benefit of not being flooded, the security of being able to go to bed at night knowing that you don't have to worry, the ability for businesses to invest with confidence. I think those are just as important as calibrating the actual damage on a particular set of houses.
Yeah, just coming back to your strategy again, it talks about a vision for today, tomorrow, and the year 2100, which seems a bit distant at the moment. I just say, in December, I went out on a winter exercise with the team in King's Lynn. I have to say, I was very impressed by the efficiency and the organisation of that and the floodgates system that's in place. But in 2013, the water came pretty close to breaching those gates, and if the wind hadn't turned course, then that's what the EA expected would have happened. So given that, and looking to 2100, can you give a commitment that places like King's Lynn are going to be properly protected throughout that period?
So I think the first thing to say on the sort of 2100 is, in a way, it is a long way away, and neither of us may be here to debate it when it arrives. But we are already planning for 70 years away. So, for example, the Thames Barrier will come to the end of its design life sometime around the 2070s. We already have a very clear idea about where we may build the next one, and we're already taking action to ensure that we have the capacity and, if we needed, the land to build that one. So we do have to think very long term if we're going to do the best we can for the people who come after us. On your question, I can give you an absolute commitment that we will do everything we can, not just for King's Lynn, but for every community in the country, to protect that community against flood risk and to make them more resilient in the face of climate change. That does not mean we can give anyone in King's Lynn or anyone else in the country a guarantee, as you know, that they will never flood, because nature will always be stronger than us. We can give them a commitment. We will do everything we can to reduce their risk.
Yeah, no, that's reassuring. And finally, for my questions, I just want to turn to the overall impact of the investment programme over the next 6 years. And I think, how meaningful is an estimate of reducing flood risk by up to 11%? What does that mean to one of my constituents?
It's a good question, and our experience is that actually probabilities don't really work. People don't really understand them. I find some of the probabilities, frankly, quite difficult to understand. What people do understand and they do care about is the basic question: am I at risk? Am I protected? And so we have shifted our messaging when we talk about flood risk to communities, not in terms of probabilities, but in terms of, you are at risk if you live in this area, and you can find out whether you're at risk by putting your postcode into gov.uk. And if you are at risk, then here are the things that you need to do. You need to do these things now, and you need to be ready to do these things if flooding happens. So that is a deliberate decision on our part to be, if you like, much simpler and much clearer with people about, let's not worry about the level of risk. Let's just be clear that if you are at risk, here are the things that you need to do. And, for constituents where we build flood defences, my experience, I've visited a lot of those constituencies. I try to, make sure I understand how local people feel. My experience is that when people know that they have a new, stronger flood defence, it does contribute hugely to their mental well-being and their physical well-being, and it does contribute, as you all know, to business confidence too. So there are a whole bunch of intangible benefits as well as that very clear risk protection.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Finkelstein. You're planning to publish a set of indicators by spring next year, I think. Are they going to be specific and measurable targets on the overall flood risk in the future? So
this spring we will publish as part of the kind of programme, ahead of the programme, a set of key indicators and performance around the new investment programme. What we're going to do by next spring is develop that kind of national set of indicators on risk. Yeah, so that's what we're working on.
Okay, and there'll be measurable targets for.
Yeah, there'll be measurable indicators to track. Absolutely.
Okay, well, we will be looking forward and tracking those as